I have a question for you. Can you hear it? If you listen closely, you can hear waves lapping on the fine sand beaches, the faint sounds of various competing live music events, or the mishmash of conversations pouring out from bars and cafes just over the clinking glasses of rosé. In about 5 weeks, Adland will take over a small resort city in the south of France for a week-long industry bonanza. The 2026 Cannes Lions International Festival of Creativity is on the horizon, slated for the last full week of June. And rest assured, the medical marketing community will be there in force. Nearly 1 month ago, the juries for the Health and Wellness Lions and the Pharma Lions were announced, featuring a few North American-based creatives, including Chris Charles, Executive Creative Director of Real Chemistry subsidiary 21Grams. You might remember Chris and his team for their Gold Pharma Lions winning work on behalf of Biogen for Friedreich's back, a darkly humorous campaign focused on the terminal condition Friedreich's ataxia. For this week's episode, Chris joins us for a conversation about the early stages of the sizable task undertaken by the Cannes Pharma jury and what trends he's keeping an eye on as they analyze the nominated work. He also reflects on the success of Friedreich's back and why Cannes is important to pharma marketers and advertisers writ large. And for our trend segment, we're talking about the frustrating mixed public health messaging surrounding the hantavirus cruise ship outbreak.
This is going to be a great time.
Chris, thank you for joining the podcast. Why don't we start with the biggest news of all? You are a Cannes juror. What was it like getting that notice that you were going to be on the jury?
It was so great. You don't usually think of ever doing something like that, you know, and you like when you start the industry or whatever, you're just trying to pretty much make a buck or make some kind of impact somewhere, you know? Mm-hmm. But getting the email and just, you know, letting it set in, it's kind of crazy because it doesn't set in. You almost sit there for a second and it's like, you know, a bit of the whole imposter syndrome, you know, you're like, mm-hmm. What, me? Really? But then after a couple of days, it comes to light, you know, when, say Tom Richards, our global CCO and Frank Mazzola, the founder, when they're like, holy shit. Like, you know, like then you're like, okay, this is real. This is cool. You know, it's exciting. Just truly honored, really.
No, that's awesome. And I imagine, though, after a while, it goes from excitement and that sort of enthusiasm and the holy shit moment from your CEO to, oh, there's a lot of work that goes into this. And I'm curious what that has been like because even just here, I've done some judging for the Neil Awards. We do some internal awards stuff, but like, I'm sure you've done judging in the past too, but this is Cannes. This is the granddaddy of them all. What has that been like from a workflow perspective? Ooh,
the granddaddy of them all. I like that.
Oh yeah. Get a little Rose Bowl in there.
Yeah, it's, well, we're getting started, you know, mm-hmm. I've got to meet the other jury members, which is great. It is a big responsibility. Like, that's what it is. We have to keep the industry moving forward. It's done so much over the past 10 years when you think about it, especially where it started in Cannes when they opened up a pharma category in Cannes, you know, like it wasn't I don't think it was the greatest then. And now it's like we're punching in the same weight class as a lot of consumer brands and stuff like that, which is where we want to be. So responsibility is number one. Yeah. Like got to keep moving that forward. And it's just, again, I feel accountable to like, anybody that puts work in to review it thoroughly, understand what the insights are, you know, the innovation or the impact or whatever it is, and judge it accordingly. So yeah, sure. It's a burden. It's on my shoulders, but I can handle it. My mom tells me I can, so that's good.
You seem to be handling it just fine. I think that she's accurate in that description. I wanted to go, you know, we're not going to talk for anybody in the audience who's like, oh, we're not going to talk about specific campaigns or anything. I would never put you in that position, but I'm curious if maybe like the trends that you're looking at. I remember last year I talked with Franklin Williams, who was from Area 23, now part of Omnicom, and he was the jury chair for pharma and was talking about like, obviously there was a big focus on AI. There was obviously a lot of humor, and we can talk about some other humor campaigns that were awarded in Cannes and other award ceremonies last year. But like, what are some of the trend lines that you're looking at in terms of either the work that you've gone to look at or that you expect to see when you really get into the throes of judging?
Since we're just getting started, it's probably what I expect, like to see from a lot of conversations that I've had and work that I've, seen over the past couple months or what I've started to. And first thing, there's going to be more audience-led work, right? You have to and the thing is, if the audience leads, like your idea, your concepts, let me back up. If the audience leads your concepts instead of you talking about the product first, you're going to have a far more bigger range of tonality when you think about it, right? So a lot of big healthcare work in the past that is interesting or attention grabbing was really purpose led, when you think about it in the past, it's a bit one note when you put it all together because it's all touchy-feely. It hits you in the heartstrings, which is great. Don't get me wrong. But when you follow your audience, what they want, what they expect to see, what they need to see, what they want to see, what they consume, whatever they're into, really overall, it leads to a lot of different angles and executions. Therefore, gut-wrenching, empowering, humor, all those different things. So that's going to be a big trend for sure.
It's interesting to hear you bring that up too. And I want to kind of delve into some of the other trends too, but you talk about that kind of purpose-led. I don't want to say it seems like common sense, at least when I talk with agency and creative folks, but like there is a lot of this, we don't have to lead with the treatment or the medication or whatever. We should really be leading more with the patient. And that's like, yeah, I mean, I've been covering this industry for, both in terms of pharma marketing, even back to when I covered hospitals. And it's like, yeah, patients should be the focus, but for whatever reason, the marketing, the advertising is not always reflected that. Luckily, I think we're starting to see a little bit of a turn back in that direction, but it's kind of, to some, it seems like an aha all of a sudden.
You're preaching to the choir, man. I think, it should feel that obvious. I think there's a lot of things that go, I could pull it apart for years, I think. But like, if you think about the industry and how pharma or healthcare has worked over the years, they haven't been ahead of the game when it comes to advertising. I think that's a fair thing to say. I think it is catching up drastically, which is great. But think about where it started. Like if people are in, if you think about if people are in need of something or whatever, okay, we will do purpose-led stuff, because that's what people need, but the thing is that's still got a little bit of a product flavor to it rather than really understanding the audience, knowing who they are and knowing them better than they know themselves, and then really letting them guide you on where the work would take you. So yeah, it seems like common sense, but I think the industry gets it in its own way a lot. If it's political paradigms within companies or and the need to, or a lot of pressure, I guess, political pressure from the companies that drive that. But the long story short, audience should drive everything.
Well, and talk to me a little bit about that too, because I think about what you and 21Grams in Real Chemistry worked on last year with Friedreich's back on behalf of Biogen. And I thought that was, it won a bunch of awards too at the MM+M Awards, in addition to being honored at Cannes. Like, I thought that was a really sensational way of understanding, again, what you're talking about, where it's like your audience, your target patient population is feeling and experiencing life in these certain ways. And I thought it resonated so deeply in terms, but taking a funny approach. It doesn't have to be so over the top and sentimental and somber and everything. It could be like, oh no, this is kind of a funny thing, and being able to lean in with the comedian you brought on board and Bill Nye. Talk a little bit about actually taking what you're talking about conceptually and then putting that into application, and then obviously getting awarded for it.
Yeah, I think this is touching on the next trend as well, with humor and everything, right? I think Friedreich's back, hopefully, I have high hopes opened up the floodgates for healthcare. Audience led based off of what we saw the audience was doing, and Fiona Cawley, famous comedian, what she was saying on her social media and everything, about they've cried enough. There's no reason to get served up a Sarah McLachlan sob story. It's just, they're down. Why put them down even more, and, when we made Friedrich's back, it was a darkish comedy. We dug up somebody that was dead and, and communicated with it on the disease, but also it was for a terminal disease. So if we can do it there, why couldn't you do it in any other form? You know what I mean? If you learn that that's what the audience is into, they're into comedy, they're making jokes about their situation, then ride that wave, and make the content with them. That's a key point. Make the content with them, because if you do it alone, you're an outsider. That's never going to go well. But gut check it with them, show them content, create with them, do all that stuff. Sure. But, it's not a risky idea if the audience is already there. It's just a smart idea. So I do have high hopes about, seeing more funny stuff in healthcare. Because, and also they opened up the use of humor category in Cannes this year. Not saying it was, the work from Friedrich's back alone, but I think we put in a lot of work over the past, since 2019 is 21Grams, of a lot of comedy every year. There's comedy with several submissions. And then also last year was The Talk, with me, Bill Nye, and Fiona Cawley, called Laughing at Doom. And that was all about the science of funny, the science of laughter, and how that sticks in your brain. So hopefully all that work paid off, and we're going to see a lot more funny stuff this year.
No, and I love the point that you make about involving the community that you're appealing to. I think about a couple of years ago, there was the Genentech had their play or their musical that they ran here in New York. That was the Most Likely Not To. And it was focused on the SMA, the spinal muscular atrophy community. And I thought that was a perfect way of you're talking about lived experience. You're involving them throughout the process. And it was such a good interface. And I saw the same sort of thread line when it came to Friedrich's back last year. And again, about something that I didn't know a lot about SMA before we covered that. I didn't know anything about Friedrich's ataxia before I saw that out there, but I was able to say, oh, this is it's powerful for me, and I'm not even in the community. I imagine it's even more powerful for the people you're trying to target there.
Totally. It's just, if you base everything off of, again, what the audience is into, and you really tap into that, that insight or understanding what makes your audience tick, it pays off so much. It's so much more impactful. Sure, there's other things involved when you think about it, from media and an execution of an idea, but the nugget, the concept, and if it's that true to somebody and it's going to meet at their level, it's going to resonate, and it's going to do wonders for the work. It's going to do wonders for the brand. It's going to do wonders for the any company that's involved.
Absolutely. And to your point, if it can work on something that's a terminal illness, imagine what it could do for plaque psoriasis or high cholesterol or something like that. Something that's so much more widespread.
I think that, honestly, I'm really hoping, and this is a push out to everybody out there that's in the industry, I would like to see more funny stuff in oncology. And I know that sounds weird, but it's not. Think about it. If you ever watched the movie Patch Adams, I think you'd really understand. There's a need for humor. We are human beings. You have to laugh at stuff. You have to do it the right way, 100%. Then there's a sliding spectrum of what the right way is, depending on what category you're in. But again, that goes back to the audience. If you know what the audience is doing and what they're into, then you're halfway there.
And who doesn't love Patch Adams too? I challenge that to anybody who's listening to this podcast. Is if we have any Patch Adams haters, don't write in because I don't want to hear from you.
Yeah.
I got one more question for you in terms of the themes that you're seeing, and then I want to ask about CAN in a broader sense. But you talked about having community involvement, obviously the rise of humor. Is there anything else in terms of, last year it was interesting because there was all this idea of like how AI is going to impact the creative process. That's something that you're anticipating here. I know a lot of agencies I talk with have a much more sophisticated way or strategic way that they're using AI in terms of their campaigns. But is that something you've got your eye on going into it, or is it kind of more on the non-creative, non-public facing side of things?
Well, AI's all around. Like you can't get away from it, and I don't think you ever should. It's changing everything. But from a creative standpoint, I think like judging the work, like I don't know if you necessarily would like you're not. Let me back up. I guess judging the work, if you have ideas around innovation that's using AI in a new and different capacity that you've never seen before, that's interesting for sure. But if using AI to generate, say thought starters and all that stuff that like we all do now, that we all should be doing, and using AI as a tool, like that's just a thing that everybody should naturally
it's
be
table
doing.
stakes. It
by far, it's like if you're not doing it, you're behind, like way behind. You're not as fast as anybody. You're not as efficient. Like I'm not saying this, any AI, any large learning model or anything will come up with the perfect idea for you. I don't think that's there. It's not there yet, but like maybe it will be, maybe it won't. I think it's missing that human experience that we all have right now. But the thing is to get an idea off a blank page though, to a starting ground. I think it's a great place to play. But, just the last thing, but just to put a button on it is, yeah. So when looking at the work and everything, I would be looking like if there was an AI idea that was rooted in AI, and like, I would be looking for how did they use that technology in a completely different way. That's what elevates it to probably a CAN level.
No, and that's what I'm so curious about too, is like this idea of like, okay, if everyone's using it again, if it's the first image that's coming to mind, or it's part of the brainstorming for the ideas and stuff, but like I don't want to call anybody out in the podcast, but there are times where I'm like, oh yeah, I know you used AI. Like, and you don't have to just mention that in the campaign and that's what makes the campaign special. It should be that I see something, I know it's special, and you're like, oh, and that was AI in some sort of way. It almost should be working in reverse, but it's so rare, I guess, that I've seen that in healthcare, and I keep waiting for that moment where it's like, wow, that's something that's really exceptional. And then I find out that AI was in some sort of component rather than, the other way around.
Yeah. I think that's fair. Like, I've yet to see it, like, just like you said, I have yet to see it, and, hopefully, we'll see some stuff this year, or soon, but, yeah, I don't know. It's funny. I'm also at the same time, I'm like a little fatigued with the whole AI conversation. Like, cause I remember walking down the Palais like last year, and every single place, like say, any outside talk, right? You walk down, you could literally stitch every talk together into one AI talk. And it was like, yeah, it's a thing and it's here, but I do like I like the other ideas too that just don't really use it, and it's really practical and tangible and something. It's just the opposite probably because of my own fatigue, but yeah, that's me.
It's all right. I love when people tell me, they're like, oh, I don't think that there's an AI bubble. I'm like, well, Allbirds just changed their entire business model to not be about shoes anymore, to go AI. So I'm going to politely disagree with you, but that's something else entirely. Chris, I want to ask you talk about walking down the Palais, talk about the broader CAN experience, because, Madden and Jameson, two of our colleagues here at MM+M, wrote a piece about why you totally should go to CAN. And we're basically outlining all the reasons that if you haven't been to CAN, this is why you got to go. So I'll pose the same question to you. Why do you got to go to CAN?
Oh, geez. Well, just being around all of these different thought leaders at the same time, like we're talking top notch, right? And just hearing what they have to say, where they have thoughtfully put together something, for you to take away, for you to learn something, for you to take and build off of in your own way, is just valuable by itself. And we're not just talking about health industry, like not even close. You're talking about like industry leaders like, Goodby and Silverstein, or Greg Hahn, of Mischief, of like David Lubars and Droga, and like all those guys. Like hearing and seeing people like that, is it's just so inspiring. And once you leave Cannes, you have a buzz. You're ready to take on the rest of the year. And honestly, I feel like you have a little bit of a boost, after it. Like, you're like, I'm going to think of some really crazy shit right now. This is going to be awesome. And then also there's the other side of it, people outside of your industry that you get to see, and then you're pulling inspiration from, say, Liquid Death, or like, say, from Reese Witherspoon or Jimmy Fallon, whatever it is. And you're pulling inspiration from all these different sources now, that now you're coming up with angles to, say, health ideas that no one really may have thought of before, because you're just submerged into all of this really great content.
I think I've repeated this on the podcast before, and I apologize to my podcast producer if I have, but it's something that always makes me laugh. It's when I think about Cannes, is our colleague Steve Barrett of PR Week went over there a couple of years ago, and he'd come back. He's like, oh yeah, I was having this conversation with somebody at one of the parties. I think it was like a Spotify party or something, and they're cheersing rosé. And then he walks away, and somebody was like, oh, you know who that was? And he goes, no. He goes, that's Kevin Durant. He goes, who is that? And it's like, so that's an example too of like, yeah, like we're so enmeshed in the PR industry and ad world and everything. And like, obviously, if you don't pay attention to basketball, you're not going to know Kevin Durant, but it's that kind of colliding of worlds and that cross-pollination that everyone always seems to rave about. And I'm glad that seems to be your lived experience too. That in addition to enjoying the beach, and I imagine drinking a pretty good amount of rosé while you're there too.
Yeah, rosé and everything else. Everything's great. Yeah.
What else do you enjoy? You talked about the Palais. Was there anything else that like stands out to you? I've heard that the food is always a good time there. Accommodations can be few and far between, but what else do you get out of your time in Cannes in addition to just seeing all the work and all the networking that goes on there?
It's funny. I think I've been going for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years or whatever. And it's I always feel like I have a responsibility to see as much stuff as possible, like talks wise, to bring it back to the agency. Just naturally, like whatever I learn, I want to make sure that everybody else can get that opportunity in some way, or like distill it down so they can learn. So I'm probably less of a good time during the day. At night though, that's different.
That's totally different.
But I think the food is great. I think going off the beaten path a little bit to Old Town, it's called, is better for the food. I would think, and more authentic experience. So that's pretty cool. If you're ever going, you have to see what Gutter Bar is all about. It's such a slop fest. Reminds me of college, I guess, but for the ad world, and that's something to see. But and then there's a lot of other things, like you could take trips, like little motorboat trips to like islands if you have time and stuff like that. But again, I don't do much of that because I'm just like, I just feel like there's a responsibility to bring some stuff back,
Yeah, just like you said with your judging, there's a responsibility to judge, there's a responsibility to hold the industry to account, and obviously a responsibility to bring stuff back to the agency. So that definitely resonates in terms of your mission there. And I really appreciate you coming on the pod to talk about obviously what's going on in the jury room, what people can get out of Cannes. I want to leave you with the final word to our audience in case there's anything Cannes related, whether it's for the pharma advertising side of it or just Cannes writ large, that you think that they should keep in mind when it rolls around in like a month or so.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that Cannes is actually focusing on a lot this year, which is really, really special, is just the hope for all work that's going into it to be just real branded client work. I think that's very, very important for the industry. I think it's very, very important for just companies to thrive in general, because like when you think about it, we're in advertising and you have a client and you have to make great work for that client to sell a certain product or make someone aware of the product that eventually helps that person. If you do things that, that are less in that space, like say if it's just a lot of pro bono stuff or whatever, which don't get me wrong, I think there's a time and place for, I don't think it helps anything. I think when you think about judging work, it can, or anywhere really, and you are making work, like advertising work that is equal to, say, top consumer campaigns that you know and love, right? Mm-hmm. But it went through all the rules and regulations and PRC, and you work with a client really hard to figure something out, and you got through everything, all of that, and held the integrity of the idea and the execution of it. And it's still that bar up there, the best consumer work around. Like, come on, nothing can beat that. Like that's the best feeling in the world, so you could do anything. You could make a Snickers campaign. You could do a Kit Kat campaign, whatever the hell you want to do, but if you can get through all that, that's truly special. And that's what makes you a true advertising, beast, if you will.
I won't put the words in your mouth, but when you talk about some of that work that gets submitted and stuff, some people would call it awards bait or something like that. Yeah. And to your end, I think that when you have that stuff where it's like people did see that on a billboard, on a TV ad, on Instagram or something, and actually encountered it in the wild rather than just the first time when they step in a jury room or something like that, is really special. I'm glad to see that obviously holds a place in your heart too.
Oh, it's just so, yeah, it's so needed, because I think the awards bait stuff has been a conversation. You can't hide from it. Last year, it was a really big problem at Canada. It blew up, in the advertising industry in general, not just health or anything. So clearing all that out and really focusing on, what we were hired to do and what we're doing, I think is really special. So I urge everybody to, keep pushing your clients, keep pushing yourselves, and you will get through. And once you do, it's going to be that much rewarding for sure.
Absolutely. Chris, again, really appreciate all the insights. Best of luck to you and the rest of the jurors. And I can't wait to see what you guys end up awarding while you're out there in Cannes. But have a great time and look forward to having you on the show again.
Thanks, Jack. See you later.
So the fun part of doing a job like this is that anything that comes up in the world of healthcare that breaks contain, you end up getting asked about. And I think about that in more recent sense of the hantavirus outbreak. And I just want to level set for our audience before we get into, I think, where it's a little bit more relevant for our side of the business. As of this recording, it's just afternoon on Tuesday, May 12th. There's a total of 11 hantavirus cases that have been confirmed, 3 deaths, a Dutch couple and a German national, all from this cruise ship that was departing out of Argentina, and then obviously has had a rough go of it as they've gone across the Atlantic. There were 18 Americans that were evacuated from the ship. 17 of them are being quarantined at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. One's being quarantined at Emory University in Atlanta. Given the hantavirus's long incubation period of 42 days, quote, we might see more cases in the coming weeks. That's from the Director General of the WHO. I want to pause there before we get into anything else. That's where things stand right now. We can't speculate about where things are going to go. We can't speculate about any of that sort of stuff. And I want to make this as speculation free as possible, while also saying that, and I said this to Bella when I got in this morning because we were going to talk about this topic, I think that we as a society, if not an industry writ large, suffer from a collective trauma around the COVID pandemic and the way it was handled and the way it was mismanaged on a number of fronts that we have not fully gotten over. And I think when you see something like this, I know Lesha, you, Mark, and I talked about a year or so ago when the bird flu was, popping up in terms of cases and stuff. Same thing with measles. There is this instinct to be like, is this the real thing, or is this just us being really paranoid? And I want to throw it over to you because we have had this conversation on the show before, is just what you make of what we know right now.
Yeah, I think the collective trauma, that's a very valid point, because it goes beyond just like how it was handled public health wise to like the kind of like societal impacts that we really haven't resolved yet in terms of like the impact of isolation on society and people's mental health and all that stuff. So I do think we do still have that collective trauma that we haven't really worked through since COVID. I think it's probably too early to tell whether hantavirus will be COVID 2.0 or if it will be more similar to like the Ebola scare that we had in 2014 that was more contained, or Zika, or bird flu, which didn't really end up becoming as massive as COVID. So I think it's still a little too early. The WHO has put out some information about the hantavirus, but hasn't really rung the alarms yet about it. And the CDC posted a note on its website claiming that the risk of hantavirus spreading was extremely low and that routine travel can continue as normal. But of course, I sort of take that with a grain of salt because it is RFK Jr.'s CDC. And in RFK Jr.'s world, data and science don't really matter and are even villainized. I do think it's a little too early. I think that unfortunately, currently, the administration that we have is not the best voice that we should be following when it comes to kind of like day-to-day, minute-by-minute communication about this, because it could change rapidly. Because remember when COVID first started, we didn't think anything of it. We just heard about a few coronavirus cases on the other side of the world, and all of a sudden it hit all at once. So it's always a possibility that could happen, but I don't think that will happen right now.
Yeah.
But I'm curious what you both think.
And that's something too, where we're not trying to be blasé. We're not trying to, whistling past the graveyard here, but it is a different virus altogether too. And I think that's been something that I've seen epidemiologists, and that's where Bella's going to kind of talk about what we've seen the coverage in stat coming out there and saying this is not the same thing as, the way that COVID spreads, the way that the flu spreads and all that sort of stuff. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But I think your point is also well taken, where you have HHS Secretary Kennedy on Monday saying he's, quote, not worried about it, praising the CDC's response effort. That also comes amid, we don't have a head of the CDC. We have an acting head who is also the actual head of the NIH. He gave a bumbling response about the outbreak to Jake Tapper on CNN over the weekend. We are currently seeing the slow walking. By the time that we are recording this, we still have an FDA commissioner. By the time you listen to it, that might have changed. Yeah. I do want to say I got a note from Endpoints that they have him speaking on a panel that's also co-sponsored with the Financial Times on Thursday. The tickets are still available if that's something you want to go to. This is all in flux, but it is one of those things. I think your point's well taken, Lesha, where people have this, oh yeah, we've been here before. We've been don't worry, it's a virus that's in the oceans that started on a cruise ship and certain. So there are a lot of parallels, but it's also not exactly the same thing. Bella, I want to bring you in because you were in college when that happened too. So this is, I think, a little more acute, I guess you could say, in terms of your experience. But what are you making in terms of how this has played out really over the past week and a half, 2 weeks?
Well, as Lesha mentioned, I think I was in my spring of my sophomore year at Ohio State when one of my professors who had, a seat on the board, and maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but was like, the board of trustees is talking about COVID and how, half of them believe the transmission from like the bat to the human, or there's just there was a lot of speculation and a lot of, there wasn't a lot of awareness or education, which why would the average Joe have a heightened expertise on communicable disease, right? Mm-hmm. But that she was sort of I don't know, people are saying after spring break, it seems like we might not come back. And so I feel like that was, it was one of those things that when it started, it seemed ridiculous. Then it quickly seemed not ridiculous. With this, it doesn't seem, it has some of the undercurrents of what the early COVID outbreak, sounded like too, with people are like, what do you mean you can contract this from a bat? What do you mean you can contract this from a rat? And usually people don't spread it, but in this case, they do spread it. There's just a lot of, without being an epidemiologist, a lot of confusing things swirling around. And it's curious to see the U.S. Say, all good, we got it.
Well, they're just brushing it under the rug. That's the last thing we need right now.
While we're not in the WHO too, which again,
right.
I think in a past life would have been like, oh, it's kind of this abstract thing. Like, why do we have to be there? But when you have a moment like this, where you have, this is again why I think a lot of people, it's again, you don't want to always be an alarmist, but when it's like RFK Jr. is HHS secretary in normal day to day, maybe that's fine. But when you have a moment of crisis, is that the person you want to go to? And we don't have an actual head of the CDC, when we're not in the WHO, where people are getting all this conflicting information. And I have well-meaning people, like what I would otherwise consider. We were talking a couple of weeks ago about where they get their news from. Very mainstream people being like, is this COVID again? Is this something even worse? Like, and it's like, well, how do you ratchet that down without also being like, but it is something you should keep an eye on without having to, wet the bed over it. Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. And, there was one line I wanted to quote from the stat op-ed you mentioned from an epidemiologist out of Chicago, which she was like, the headlines, the national attention that this has gotten so far is sort of, it's notable, and it's kicked up this cycle, or this process of like consciousness the public goes through, which is, she says, the individual claims almost matter less than the cycle itself, which is see a new disease, distrust the official explanation, assume a cover up, mention ivermectin, suggest a hidden profit motive, and repeat. And I think we're in that cycle. I mean, there was a headline a couple days ago about how biotech stocks jumped a little bit. Just again, like in the early days of this news, people were like, oh, like, is it going to be another big business with the vaccine, or, any sort of intervention there? So it still feels very, very, early days and like it's developing.
And in the financial analysis I saw, because CNBC had some reporting around that, like it was a benefit to a lot of vaccine makers, is the fact that people are obviously looking, they're saying, oh, like if this is a moment where Moderna with their mRNA technology or any of that sort of stuff, and people buy in. But there was also the other side where it's like, given the way that this spreads, given how limited it has been to this ship, it could be one of those things where you just see a brief commercial opportunity to go. But there is a longer term lesson here. And I want to ask you, Lesha, because you've done a lot of reporting around like CDC messaging. And I remember when it was like during the Biden era, like, okay, we're trying to normalize and more effectively communicate. And it was very gentle, kind of like resetting this very damaged table. Trump gets reelected. It's blown to pieces again. Like, what do you make of this kind of moment in terms of like, we really don't have a public health messaging apparatus that's geared for this?
Definitely not. I mean, the public health messaging apparatus now is all MAHA and kind of like going in the opposite direction and like flipping things around completely. So the CDC under Mandy Cohen, when I was, writing about some of the CDC's trust building efforts, she was very clear about wanting to rebuild trust among Americans, including those who are very like vaccine hesitant, vaccine skeptical, and really approach it from the view of like, well, we're not going to like judge these people or make them feel bad about the fact that they're vaccine skeptical. We need to kind of meet them where they are. And under RFK Jr., obviously now it's the complete opposite. It's like we need to completely blow up everything that we know about vaccines. We need to not talk about the fact that measles cases have been skyrocketing the last couple of years. This kind of idea of like brushing all of this under the rug, and focusing on other things like autism and Tylenol and, food issues. So, as Bella mentioned, there was a lot of confusion around in the early days of COVID. And I feel like people are still kind of confused about what happened with COVID. Was it a lab leak? Like there's still so much like misinformation and stuff like that around COVID that like that trust around public health messaging never had the chance to be rebuilt. And we're kind of in this moment now in this post-COVID world. And everything is kind of like fractured. So I think if the hantavirus was to turn into something more serious, I don't think there would be as, there wouldn't be as clear of a strategy in place like we had with COVID, because I think there'd be so much pushback now and it'd be so fractured. So a little concerning.
No, for sure. And it's like, again, if we're looking at this as what is on the whole, probably and I say knock on wood, take the biggest grain of salt, limited set of cases, it's also one of the things that just, it shows this wider issue that's at play here in terms of like something happens, you see misinformation spread online, you see people that are not well equipped, even in government positions, to be able to address this. The fact that I saw an article in the Wall Street Journal today talking about like, oh yeah, there should be a lot more funding for research into, because there is no hantavirus vaccine, there's no treatment, right. The mortality rate is so high on it. But people are only now saying, oh, well, we should start looking into that. It's like, well, we had pandemic preparedness. Mm-hmm. Right. Initiatives, programs, all
that was
stuff.
Defunded.
And it's all gone. Years, yeah. And it's like, that's the whole reason you do this, is so that when something like this happens, I'm not reading about what we should be doing in the Wall Street Journal. It's like, oh no, there should be some nameless government organization that gets its funding, does this.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because I mean, a few years ago when all of that started getting defunded and people stopped caring, you know, there were several leading scientists and epidemiologists who were warning, there's going to be another pandemic, you guys. Yeah. It's going to happen. There's no question about it. We shouldn't be defunding this stuff, but here we are.
And look at any movie that you watch too, where it's like, oh yeah, like outbreak happens or whatever. It's like the CDC, it's like, it's always based in Atlanta, like the CDC steps in and whatever. And it's like, well, there's nobody leading the CDC right now. The staff has been decimated over the Doge cuts and everything like that. So it's like, oh yeah, when that moment happens and now we have no body that's there to respond to it, it's eternally frustrating and predictable.
But it's a good thing that the head of the HHS has a podcast.
Yeah, and that's super cool too.
Thank
like,
God.
And again, it's one of those things like, should we be getting the additives out of the food? Should we be doing a lot of these things that Maha focused on? Yes, but when, God forbid, the virus of a generation or a lifetime comes through, I don't care how much broccoli you eat. That's not gonna, it's not gonna make a difference here.
And is there ever a way? Will we ever? Not to get all existential. This is really existential, but is there ever going to be a way for like the American public to marry in their heads again what is investing in science, research, preparedness around vaccines and disease prevention generally, communicable disease, and not having to suffer this like mental anguish that comes with, you know, like, oh, there's this outbreak on this cruise ship, or there's like, you know, what is the next thing that might be COVID 2.0? Like, will we ever be able to like join those things again to where people, the agenda and the investment in science from the left and the right is there. You know what I mean?
I think the thing that we really struggle with and again, not to be too abstract here, but I think it's something that our audience deals with because they have to communicate and message and understand what people do on a deal. Like, we lost 1.2 million Americans in addition to everybody that died around the world from the COVID pandemic. And we just kind of like ate that. That was just like unfortunately, that was kind of the cost of doing business. And I don't want to be too pessimistic. I'm usually a glass half full kind of guy. But if you're just willing to eat 1.2 million lives, what else can you then just explain away? Like, what else can you just say like, well, those were unhealthy people. They were obese. It was their time. They were too old, whatever. Like, and if you start to see that, it's like, well, then it just becomes survival of the fittest. And that just becomes the most raw, visceral, ugly side of the American experience right there. And I don't know how you put that back together, especially in the age of social media, especially when I can open my TikTok and see 5 different incorrect explanations about what's going on that cruise ship, even though you have people who are on the cruise ship saying like, this is what's going on. You have doctors on there. Yeah. I don't know how you bridge that gap. And you've talked to Mandy Cohen, you've talked to people around Biden era CDC, and that's what they were trying to do ever so gently. And then it all just got washed away in November of 24.
I think this is making me think, though, about some of the conversations we've had about brands, pharma and biotech companies bringing people into the conversation about discovery and research and, the gobs of money that go into those things and doing sort of like proactive PR, being like, this is what, because I mean, I myself just learned the other day that the vaccines for COVID were they stemmed from, or there was a or foundation of research for cancer vaccines that those were built off of, which is amazing.
Yeah.
We all know about that.
Yeah. Like a lot of the research that leads to breakthrough treatments and vaccines happened like 10 to 20 years beforehand. So, and all of that has been defunded.
And Matt's talking about it too, where it's like, it is those kind of like, that's the whole story of Viagra. It was supposed to be for one thing. It turns into another. And like, that's just how medicine works. It was the thing with penicillin where it was like, oh yeah. And you suddenly just see it in a petri dish, like, and not for nothing because you are the the youth of the group here, but like, I'm sure that there is somebody your age who has one of those little clip-on mics on their iPhone that wants to go around and become a content creator. Yeah, Pfizer should be inviting them in. Bristol Myers Squibb. Lily, like, it should be one of those things where it's like, hey, we're doing this really cool research, and like, we can't show you the X's and O's, but we can show you the broad strokes so that you have a better trust in us, because to your point, this is part of the cycle. It's like, oh, is this something that was leaked out by some pharma company? Because then they're going to sell us their hantavirus vaccine or something after uncounted people died. Like, it's, yeah, there has to be some break in the cycle, and I just don't know that we're any closer to getting there.
Maybe hantavirus will, in a roundabout way, help us get there. I don't know.
From your lips to God's ears, though. I don't know that that's going to be the thing that gets us there, but we'll see. Is there anything that we missed on this? I guess I want to leave with a parting note to the audience is like, it's not exactly the time to worry, but the thing that worries me almost more than just this contained aspect on the ship is the fact of the lack of contact tracing. I cannot believe that people got off that boat and got on commercial planes. And suddenly now we're doing this, like, contact tracing is nothing I didn't know about that before COVID, but I would have thought that's just standard procedure afterwards. Like, the fact that we are still making these mistakes, the fact that there is still so much prolific misinformation out there.
Yeah.
I think that's where I get so frustrated with it, even more than it's like, do I think that any of us are probably going to interact? No, but it's like that we're just living this cycle over again.
Yeah, the lesson wasn't learned.
Yeah. It's like some sort of like Twilight Zone episode where it's like we're condemned to this fate.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that somebody in our audience that resonates, that whether at their agency or at their brand or something is like that something is going to be able to break that chain and make it happen. I just don't know when. But in the meantime, go out there, combat any of that misinformation that you see. As this continues to evolve, we'll be able to talk about it, but that's at least our snapshot here. And I appreciate everybody in the audience bearing with us as we kind of go through a lot of moving pieces, especially by the time that they listen to this. Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of the podcast. Be sure to listen to next week's episode. We're going to have our ASCO preview with Dr. Kimberly Koo. Lesha's going to have that interview. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you next time. Take care. The MM+M podcast is produced by our editorial staff, Bella Jakowski, Lesha Bushek, Steve Madden, Jameson Fleming, and Jack O'Brien, with production and editing by Bill Fitzpatrick and Gordon Thaler. Listen to all episodes at mmm-online.com or wherever you get your podcasts.